Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
I'm good, Shabbar. Yeah, a little sleepy right now, but I'm good. I just had a
Okay.
long, quite intense call myself,
All right.
but I'm okay. I'll wake up. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm looking forward to continuing last week's conversation where we brought in the idea of the money path and the life path. And you took some time to explain, especially to new listeners, this idea of the money path and life path. And we started to touch upon the area of one's money path, which pretty much is heavily dominated by the work that they do, because work generally is one of the main ways that we earn money. I almost said earn a living, but
Well,
caught
we
my
talked about that last week, didn't we? We talked about that
exactly.
phrase.
And you brought up a very interesting set of threads around how historically just the words that are associated with work allude to an enduring of suffering and trial, and this unhelpful language feeds into the way we view work. And
Mm.
do you want to sort of just recap on that and
Yeah.
then what we're going to sort of go on to talk about this week, which is the flip side, which is how could we incorporate the life path in our work? So,
I mean, so briefly, we're focusing on the idea of work because we talk a lot about money on this podcast, as you say, but work for most people is how they get money. And there are a whole load of assumptions baked into what we think work is and how it must be. So, yeah, we looked last week at, as you say, the origins of lots of languages across the whole of Europe. Different types of language all have something quite negative about work: pain, suffering. The money you get is a compensation for your suffering. We look briefly at religious ideas, certainly in Christianity. And all of this is suggesting that whether we realize it or not, we sort of often picked up a kind of negative view of work that, well, it's had to be endured. You're not meant to enjoy it. It's there for suffering for one reason or another. And that the money you get is kind of what you get for your suffering. And what we were saying last week is as long as we have those ideas deep down and don't realize we've got them, it makes it much, much harder for people to do this thing that we often talk about on the podcast, to live your life path with and without money. Right. And we gave two main examples. One is if I don't have much money, but I've got to work, etc., I might not like my situation and I might really struggle with it. But it's almost like deep down, I think it has to be like this. So I'm more likely to kind of accept or put up with it or just assume it can't be any other way. And on the other hand, we also talked about golden handcuffs and people who earn lots of money from their work, but who still actually hate it or find it suffering or it's not what they want to do. So just because they've got money, again, they can think, well, at least I've got money, but work's not meant to be something that's expressive or fulfilling or enjoyable. So at both ends of the financial spectrum, we can realize we're playing out some story of what we think work must be. And so we just want people to question those ideas and consider them. And as we always say on the podcast, we're not being stupid about money or bills or reality, but these ideas go deep. And so we want to examine.
yeah. And I think for me, a big takeaway from last week was just this idea that, well, just because you've got money, you can't suffer in work. And it's so apparent that, like you were narrating, that, people in high paid jobs, feel at times physically sick, in certain situations that are, very toxic and not really that conducive to having any kind of enjoyment whatsoever in something that they spend, maybe 8 to 10 hours a day, doing. But it's just so funny that we almost like conditioned to believe that, okay, well, as long as you're getting a good amount of money, everything should be okay. And that's, and that's totally fine. And I think just being aware and doing that sort of detective work and seeing things just helps you to question the reality of our thinking. So I'm interested to see where we're going with how do you incorporate the life path or start to think about work in a slightly different way?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the first step for people from last week and where we've got to is just for them to notice assumptions about work and how it must be or what they think is realistic. Because whenever we're talking about what's real or realistic, we're really just talking about our own mindset. And for many people to notice if it's wrapped up in these sort of heavy ideas of suffering. And then there's the question, well, are there descriptions of work or ways of thinking about work that support more this idea of life path? Follow what's yours to do, as we say on the podcast, with and without money. Are there ideas about work that actually, again, not being naive or stupid about it, but is it okay for me to follow what I really believe in or what I'm really called to do? And again, this conversation won't solve all of the fears or anxieties that come up around that, but hopefully it can support people to head in that direction. Maybe I start with where to start, because there's a few people I want to mention. Maybe from some of Jung's ideas, because they it's like they're a bridge between the two. And we've talked about Jung's ideas before. And very, very briefly, Jung talks about different parts of ourselves, right? And what he says is on the personal level, we all have what he calls a persona, right? We all have, it's almost like a kind of a mask or an appearance we give to the world, right? Or a role we step in just to get on in the world. And it's important to say that that doesn't make us bad people. It's not like it's fake. It's not deceitful. We need to step into roles in order to survive in the world and engage in society. So you have your dad role and you have your financial advisor persona. And it's sort of appropriate in some way that we manage or adapt to what's expected in a certain role and we fulfill that role. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on that. But sometimes people think persona is just your fake and you must always be authentic. It's not quite like that. It's required, really. So like, when you go to your mosque or your daughter's going to get married or you kind of show up in a particular way. And so there's an awful lot where we learn in different ways to play out a role or mold ourselves to kind of society's expectations. There's nothing wrong with it, but where it goes wrong is if we get stuck in it or we think that's the whole of who we are. So if okay, in the mosque, at a wedding, or when I'm at a financial conference, I kind of show up this way and I talk about these things and maybe talk less about, that's fine if you're conscious. But what a lot of people do is they start to become or identify with the persona, and then they miss out all of these other parts of who they are, right?
Okay.
So what Jung would call our self, the kind of whole or the bigger part of ourselves, which is a great mystery and contains all of these possibilities and all of this kind of growth and evolution, we identify with our persona, okay? Why is this relevant to our conversation? Because your persona is going to have, if you like, a view of work that's much more about adapting to what's expected of me and how to fit in and how to survive. And if I get too locked into that, my persona, my view of work from there completely ignores all of these more inconvenient things like, who am I really? And what might I really be here to bring to the world or to learn or to follow? So the persona is much more like adapted to the economic realities of culture. And the self, and it's very challenging when people say be authentic or be who you really are, it's quite challenging because the self doesn't really care about your budget or your income or your car or your status. It's demanding something actually bigger of you, deeper of you. So my suggestion in terms of work is this: what someone like Jung would say is ultimately best for us and most healthy for us. And actually the real reason we're here is to get in touch with this bigger sense of self and to try and follow the direction that, if you like, our deeper self or our wiser self really wants for us. But we need to recognize that might be very inconvenient or provoking to a persona that's more about fitting into a particular role or a particular part of society. And to me, that's quite a nice description of what we're talking about with money path, life path. Sometimes what our work really is may not fit a role we've been brought up into, a role we've given ourselves, a role we even feel comfortable in, and it may even require us to do something that doesn't pay as much or has a financial hit. So this is one story of why it might be good to do anyway, but still scary to do deeper work or to follow a deeper calling. Let me stop there because I'm sure it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah. So The first thing I wanted to ask is any examples of how this would play out? I mean, what you just described
Yes.
in a very theoretical
Yeah. Well,
way.
millions all over the place. The number of people who come on my workshops who long to do something different, and that longing comes from, let's say, it feels like their soul, and who don't do it because they feel that they can't, they shouldn't, or they mustn't. So I'm thinking of someone who wanted to set up their own business, but they were a lawyer and their parents had always wanted them to be a lawyer, and they studied law, and they'd actually 2 or 3 times left law and started their own business and then sort of wobbled and gone back to law. So for me, I mean, I didn't know this person in great detail. They came to a workshop, but that's an example of the struggle many of us have in our work, filling a role that's a little bit expected of me and I've invested in
Mm,
because I trained and my parents approve of it and my peers approve of it. That's more like an adaptation and something else that keeps pulling me or calling me, even though it's scary and my parents don't approve and I don't know if I'll get money, but it seems to come from somewhere
mm,
deeper. And another example I think I've mentioned on the podcast is a woman who always had a dream from a very young age of doing medical work in Africa, very specific. And that came when she was young. She drew pictures of it. She had some kind of real dream about doing something that in some way didn't make sense. She was brought up in the north of England, right? As a 7-year-old, why would you have that fantasy? So very often that's a sign of something deeper, something about
mm,
herself or some journey or some part that she has to express. But she never did it. Again, because we're adapted into certain roles and certain expectations. She got close because she ended up kind of running hospitals in the UK. So she followed it as far as she could. She followed this deeper calling, but still within an adaptation of how you could do it. And the step to do something maybe a little crazy or a little risky was both part of a dream or a deeper vocation, but something that she found hard to do. She did eventually move in that direction. Does that help with those sorts of examples?
yeah, and also I was just sort of questioning, we've talked a lot about like narratives that
Mm,
get passed down through, parents or society, religions, etc. And then it's almost like the judgments that we build up that sometimes can be self-inflicted. Like we judge ourselves that, oh, what type of person would it make me if I went and did something like this, which could go against the grain of the upbringing that we had. I've got a client who has always been seen as very diligent, sensible, a real saver, all of those sorts of characteristics. And now the idea of taking a sabbatical and going and doing something that she really would love to do is causing a real conflict. So there's this sort of life path impulse, but
mm.
then the judgment of, what does that make me if I go and do this? I think that's quite interesting. Probably feeds into what you're.
Well, absolutely, because all of those judgments, whether they're the judgments we actually hear from friends, family, colleagues, or the inner voices, the internalized judgments, all of those are, you could say, they're the sort of forces of our culture or our family or upbringing that tend to keep us in our role, in our persona, where we're adapting and we're in a particular role, but we're not really being true to ourselves. And it's scary and it's not easy, but in terms of work, from that point of view, someone like Jung might say, well, your real work is to be yourself and
Mm,
become yourself. And your real work is to take whatever steps or express in the world whatever you feel you're here to do. I mean, that's not necessarily straightforward for people. But the point here, and I'll come on to another kind of thinker on this, is two things. One is in a way, it's a deeper or higher view of what work really is. So he might say, look, your work isn't just to adapt, find a place that fits society, pay your taxes. Your work is to really listen to whatever it is you think you're here to do or create or be or become and follow that. And that might be scary, right? It's not like that's going to be super easy. There may be consequences, but that is a definition of work. It's just a different definition to the one
mm.
we talked about last week.
I'm also sort of thinking that in terms of when you say one's work, it
Yeah,
doesn't need to necessarily be like the vocational, like the 9 to 5,
right.
the earning money work,
Yeah.
because well, it's easy for me to now start to think about what would be the way of incorporating the life path in my work, or align my work to my life path, whichever way you sort of to look at it. And I'm afforded, quite a level of privilege and
Mm.
luxury that I
Mm.
could make some sacrifices and changes, etc., because I have a degree of comfort, which means I'm not worried about where, the next electricity bill is going to be paid from, or etc. If so- you know And so is this move to looking at incorporating the life path within work
Mm.
something
Mm.
that's available only to the privileged few, or is it something
Yeah.
that someone who's on their 0 hours contract, not knowing where their next bills are going to be paid for, can they possibly
Yeah, well, I mean,
incorporate?
certainly what Jung and people like him felt they were talking about was something universally human,
Mm,
right? We live in times where there's a particular inequality and a particular fragmentation of society and some particular problems. So it might seem that it's more possible for some or less possible for others. But really, what I'm suggesting is although the challenges might be very different at different ages or different income brackets or different levels of education, the challenge of becoming oneself and moving in that direction and trusting where that leads is a human challenge. And we talked a bit last week about golden handcuffs, right?
mm,
Maybe I do become a super well paid lawyer, right? But I could still be totally depressed because really I want to be an artist. And I just simply don't feel I can. Now, from the outside, people might say, well, that's a really privileged person. They've got no
mm,
problems, really. But that person might be severely depressed, really. Maybe it's helpful to think of inner and outer work. And Jung would talk about both. So for some people, regardless of their current income or their current financial challenges, when we often ask the question on the money workshop, what would you do if money were no object, right? If there was no problem with money. For some people, that listening to their deeper self or to what I'm really here to do, there is like an external thing. I would retrain as a doctor. I would paint. I would travel. There's an external thing, an action or a project or a role that they sort of know and they're not doing, right? The suggestion is if that's true for you, it is possible to commit to heading in that direction, whatever your money
mm,
situation. Now, you will have challenges and you might have very different types of challenges, but that move to say, I have always dreamed of X or Y,
mm,
I feel that's, almost inconvenient. It's not really doesn't suit my ego, doesn't suit my budget, doesn't suit my status, but it feels true. To move in that direction is challenging, I would say, for everybody and sort of closer to Jung's definition of real work. And we can have what you might call inner work. So for some people, if you said, well, what would you do, if money was no object? It might not be about what they do. It might be, I don't know, how they show up or to do their work with more depth or more love or more care. Or I've worked with a lot of people who quite like their job, actually. They quite like what they're doing. They're loyal to their organization, but they'd really like to speak out more about changing things or doing things differently or initiating new projects in their job, right? So it's not about doing something completely different, but they don't do that either because, again, they're adapting and fitting into a role. So for some people, the inner thing is, well, you stay exactly where you are, but maybe you bring more of who you are into that role. And that would also count as like a deepening into self. So I think there's inner and outer work. And for me, what's helpful is it's always challenging. So it would be a mistake to think just someone who's got money, they don't have difficulties and challenges, and someone who doesn't could never do this. I think we're talking about something deeper.
yeah.
Um,
I like the idea of actually even just becoming conscious of the fact that there is something that you would like to do.
yeah,
And even just putting that out there feels like that's just a nice thing to have out in the world, whether you've communicated it to anyone or not, but just to acknowledge that actually if it wasn't for money, this is what I would like to be doing. Giving yourself permission to dream and look at the alternative, I think, is probably the first step. And like you said, the struggle is definitely real and will be felt across the income spectrum,
in different
regardless, in
ways, in
different ways.
different ways. Yes. And some might say, I think Jung would say this, and we'll talk about someone called Joseph Campbell, the challenge is necessary. So a lot of people would say, actually, you only really meet your true challenges when you head in the direction of whatever you're really here to do. So let me give you the example. someone is in an organization, they're moderately well paid, they're okay, they quite like their job. So it's okay. But actually, they do care about something. I work with a lot of people who want to move more around climate stuff or environmental stuff. They care about this, but they never really bring it up or mention it. They keep their head down, right? When I keep my head down, I'm more comfortable. I'm less exposed. I don't risk people thinking I'm an idiot or criticizing me, or I don't risk being given a responsibility to actually do something, right? So
Mm.
as long as I keep my head down and stay more in my expected role, it's actually, even though I might feel a bit depressed or bored or soulless, I'm kind of comfortable. The moment I actually go, you know what? I like it here. I want to stay here. Thank you for my job, but I really want us to do this. And the moment I own that as some part of my inner process, whether it's convenient or not, I am actually going to be more challenged because I have to do something about it. I have to stop being afraid. I have to figure out maybe how to talk to powerful people. From a Jungian point of view, that's probably exactly what I need at this point to learn and grow and become more of who I am.
This is
So
taking me
the
back to, oh, go on. I said this is taking me back to the conversation that we had about the role of me as a financial advisor who is now embracing a different side of the work, so to speak, and the challenges that it's bringing up for me in terms of being visible and speaking against a narrative that's quite common within my peers and almost
yeah,
being seen as,
yeah,
well, what's this woohoo stuff that this guy keeps talking about, money life path and all of this. And it's a real challenge that I would like to, I don't like the word pivot because it just seems to come out of COVID, but like move the way that I present, myself in the world as a financial advisor, in the way I practice in a different way. And I don't quite know what that looks like, but I know it's not how it should be at the moment. And making that shift, I think for me is quite a life path move to incorporate this new paradigm of financial advice. And it's bloody difficult because
yes.
that whole visibility thing and going out there and stating, okay, well, this is what I'm leaning towards now and believe in, yeah, feels very challenging. So I can
Yeah,
relate to that, exactly what
yeah.
you just said.
And you've described it very well because firstly you said you don't know how to do it. So very often work from this point of view, whether it's inner or outer, it's not like we can't see really what we're heading for. It's not like I want a promotion. Now I'm a sales manager. I want to be a senior sales manager. That's more likely to be a persona move, a kind of a safe move. It's still growth, but I know I'm here and I can go there and there's a path laid out. Usually, if we follow this deeper view of work and following whatever our intuition and imagination and intelligence is saying about what I'm really here to do, it gets us to a point exactly as you said, which is there's something I'm trying to do, whether I like it or not, whether it's convenient or not. And I don't even quite know what it looks like, but I'm going to follow it. So the first thing is you don't need to know. The second thing is I often use this phrase, whether I like it or not. I think often our real work, our deeper work, has no regard for our ego or our convenience or our comfort. It might just be we need to do something or show up differently. So it might be very inconvenient. And then the final thing, and let me ask you this. So you said, yeah, it's challenging, Tim, because I have to maybe speak out and be seen and show up with confidence and maybe risk people thinking I'm crazy. If we forget about your job and you just think about your life and your maturation as a human being, as a man, are those important things for you to have to deal with in your life? Learning to speak out and be seen and people criticizing you?
Yeah, I think they're really important to try and overcome in terms of becoming, I was going to say whole, but yeah, maybe, yeah, becoming a whole human being is overcoming those sort of, what should we call them, gremlins? I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Gremlins, obstacles,
Obstacles. Yeah.
barriers, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's almost like, yeah, the move towards the life path kind of new paradigm is, paved with the obstacles, which are going to actually make you better and stronger,
Yeah.
in some way. So it's quite ironic the way that
Yeah.
it's presented.
Yeah. So this is a way of flipping it, you see, because the first thing you mentioned it maybe 5 minutes ago, you said, well, it's good for people just to think, what would I do if money were no object? What would I love
Mm.
to do? That's a great first step. The second step for people to think is maybe I could. whether I've got money or not money, or whether I'm locked in or struggling to pay bills, just not to assume that it's reality that I couldn't do that thing, right? Because as soon as I say it's impossible or it's reality, I'm locked in. And then if I think, well, I would love to do whatever it is, or I'd love to show up in this way, or I'd love to make this move, if we then go, right, the truth is I can head in that direction. I don't quite know how or how quickly. And the other truth, or consider this, the challenges that I will have to face by deciding to do it are exactly the right challenges for me to face in my life right now. That starts to flip the possibility of work as a different story. In other words, that to actually stop being in our comfort zone and do or even move towards whatever is my deeper work gives me the challenges that I actually most need right now. And that's a
Yeah.
big thing to say. I don't want to be scared. I don't want to be stressing about not paying bills. I don't want my friends to think I'm crazy. I don't want to worry that I'm going to fail and screw everything up for my kids. I don't want to deal with any of that, but it might be really good for me to have to, because that
Yeah.
stuff's still there.
Yeah.
Those fears, those insecurities are there, and they keep me small until I choose to be challenged by them.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that there were a few other people that you wanted to bring into the
Mm.
conversation in terms of their ideas. Do you want to move
Yeah,
on to?
just very briefly. Well, a lot of people have heard of a guy called Joseph Campbell, and he was also influenced a lot by Jung. And he was, well, I won't go into his background. He's a very interesting guy, but he had this phrase, which I think we should talk about, which is follow your bliss. He said, we're here to follow our bliss, and we should all follow our bliss. And I think this is very relevant as the opposite of work as struggle and inconvenience and pain. But also we need to be intelligent about it, not stupid. So a stupid way of following your bliss would be to say, I like sitting on my sofa playing video games, eating chocolates all day. That's my bliss. I'll do that then. All my bliss is staying comfortable or cozy, or having money and nice holidays is my bliss. For most people, pleasure and comfort is not what he's talking about. Bliss is more like follow where your life energy is, what makes you feel alive, again, whether you like it or not. So what is it that keeps kind of grabbing you or fascinates you or pulls you or calls you or you care about or you're passionate about? Again, it's the same, similar idea to Jung. It's like there's something that, whether we like it or not, a deeper part of us recognizes as a direction to head in or a way to show up. And what he says is that's what we're here to follow. And again, well, he says an interesting thing. The first is that you will meet challenges, right? Because most of us don't follow our bliss. We follow safety and convenience, and we follow our anxiety. So we go, oh, I wouldn't do that. Might be risky, might lose money, etc. Most of us have to be honest. We're doing that. We're kind of cowards, actually. I speak for myself as well. I know the ways in which I don't show up or don't take risks. I try and I do the best. I own my cowardice to some extent. But what he says is, so the more you follow what you're truly fascinated by, what brings your life, whatever that may be, you will be challenged, and those are good challenges to meet. And the universe will support you to do that in unexpected and surprising ways. And this is a very important idea for following our true work. And we talk about it on the Money Workshop. You will be supported, not in a woo-woo. It's not like God's going to give you money or the universe is giving you a cuddle. It's more that when you follow what's really coming from a deeper place, you are different. You're more of a force of nature. You're less split, right?
Mm.
There's more of your energy there. And then you meet the world that way, and good things are going to happen. And you need that energy to meet challenges. So that's another side. So follow your bliss, you'll meet challenges, and somehow the world will respond in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, that follow your bliss. It almost reminded me of the conversation between Alex Hormozy and Tony Robbins that you sent me, which I think might form part 3 of or part 4 of this
Yeah,
conversation. But Tony Robbins was talking about the things that motivate you, that pull you in a certain direction, and that idea of bliss when you were talking about it, it feels like it's something that is a pull factor. It's like something from outside you that says, right, you need to go in this direction, something that fulfills you and excites you. I think it's just really important to, again, acknowledge that and find what that thing could be. It might not be everything, but there might be something that you can locate, which is
that's it.
yeah, doing this particular thing lights me up. And I think that
Yeah.
can just have such an impact on an individual's life and journey that it just can't be understated to be able to find that.
And to not limit it, you see, again, the naive thing would be to say, let's take an example of I studied law. My parents wanted me to study law. I've become a lawyer. I'm earning good money. I'm working hard. I really don't like it that much. And actually, what I really love is playing my guitar and singing. Okay. For now, that's my bliss. And I go home and I love music and I compose. The naive thing would be just to assume I'm going to make a fantastic living as a musician, right? And I leave my law job straight away. That might be a bit naive, might probably be an interesting and good thing to do. But it would also be naive to go, well, I have to be a lawyer for the rest of my life to get my money, to stay in my comfort zone, to pay my mortgage, and I'll play a bit of guitar in the evenings. That's also naive because you don't know where your music could take you. You actually have no idea. What would be more intelligent would be to say, law is not my bliss. I'm doing it because it's a role, it fulfills a need. Music is my bliss. How can I follow that as much as I possibly can? And how can I commit to that and not assume it will only ever be a hobby, but just follow that path as fully as I can? And at some point, maybe you go part time, maybe you leave your job, maybe music can lead you somewhere that you can't imagine yet. It's not necessarily being Taylor Swift. Because what we often do is because of these ideas of work, we just assume my work is this thing I do for money and blah, blah, blah. I play my role. I don't like it really. And the stuff I love, I only ever get to do evenings and weekends. We don't know that that needs to be true. So there's something about
Mm.
really committing to the things you love with and without money.
Yeah. Definitely that's the struggle, right? It's really overcoming that and settling for just doing the things in fleeting moments
Yeah.
and not maybe centering life around those in as much of a way as possible and not being silly because everyone's got commitments and responsibilities but to not allow oneself to explore and it just challenge the thinking, I reckon,
Yeah.
is probably the first step. There was a third person you wanted to mention. Is that still
Well,
relevant?
very, very briefly. I mean, what I wanted to say, I didn't want to do a big sort of lecture. I just wanted to say that when you look, there are lots of people who are trying to talk more deeply and positively about what work is. That's really what I wanted to say. And that it's so important for people, whenever you think you're talking about the real world or the reality of bills and work, it often is carrying this atmosphere as it's heavy and negative and not great. And that there is something maybe more possible or intelligent. It's just not talked about much. And it's certainly not in mainstream economics and mainstream business. Um, the third person was a theologian called Matthew Fox. And he's written a book called The Reinvention of Work, which is really good. Quite old now, probably 30, 40 years old, but well worth reading. Very, very interesting thinker. He builds on these ideas about following your bliss and becoming who you really are and being challenged through your work. But then he goes even further and says, actually, the role of work and therefore organization. So if you run a business or if you're running a team or if you're in an organization, he would say, because what we're really here to do is get in touch with these deeper parts of ourselves and find out how to express them and bring stuff into the world from there. And it's scary and challenging, but will grow. He kind of says that actually is the purpose of work. So even if you're in a tire factory or it doesn't matter, you work in a cafe, you drive a bus, you work in a factory, you're a policeman, how could you regard the work you do and the team or the culture or the organization as, yes, it needs to make tires and sort out policing and drive buses, but it's there actually to help people get in touch with who they are and keep growing. So he's trying to almost redefine what work really is. And I think it's quite an old book now, but that's led to some work of people trying to reimagine what businesses are and what work's all about. And again, it's the opposite of that is what someone like the economist Milton Friedman would have said 45 years ago. The business of business is business. We're just here to make money and everything else gets taken care of by the rest of society. Someone like Matthew Fox would say, no, we have a very limited view of what work is. And whatever you do, it could become a container for people to learn and grow and develop. And that would be good for us all. That's a big idea, I guess, to dump on you at the end.
And it does. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about, is that even compatible with like the modern industrial way of capitalism, the way that we've arranged the way that businesses and the labor force and all of that interact with each other. It almost feels like that's a very far-fetched and almost like distant kind of approach,
Yeah,
because everything you said is what you just quoted in the Friedman statement, is that, well, you know, profit is at the center of everything. And there just really isn't room for much growth in that direction when the focus is on cutting costs, increasing output, and
yeah,
driving GDP forward, and
yeah,
all of that
yeah.
stuff.
And that's the paradigm we're in, and you can see a clear parallel there between what we talk about money path and life path.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. I don't think it is compatible with modern industrial capitalism. The point is, how is modern industrial capitalism working for everyone? How are we doing, everyone? Are you happy? Are you alive? Is society healthy? Is the planet doing well? Doesn't seem to me it's doing that great. So again, when people say, well, it always has to be like this and that's reality and everything else is nonsense, I would say, well, the reality is, in general, modern work is creating tremendous deprivation for large numbers of people, tremendous burnout, mental disease, and sickness for lots of people, and producing some good stuff, but a load of shit no one needs, and screwing over the planet. So maybe we try and have a better model.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable. If
That,
it was working for everyone, then why change it? But I don't think that it is.
that's a series on its own. The current system and the drive for more GDP as being the holy grail, which I'm really interested in, but
Yeah.
that's for another day. I think we're ready to wrap up. Is there anything that you want to say as a last sort of takeaway or message to the listeners today?
Not really. I think we've repeated everything about, notice your assumptions about work, consider that it doesn't have to be reality, really listen for what you think you're really here to do or say or create or bring. Consider that that is real and that the challenges you meet might be exactly what you need with and without money. There's one thing I want to say, and maybe we'll do a little mini series on this. Don't underestimate the role of each individual person who does take a step in this direction, because it is hard to change global capitalism because you can't really point to global capitalism. It's sort of everywhere. But every time one person tries to work this through and moves a little bit more into this deeper idea of work, it does change the social conversation and the collective field. So I would say to anyone listening, if that gives you even more encouragement, yes, it's hard and yes, you'll be challenged, but if you take a step, it makes it a tiny bit easier and a tiny bit less challenging for everyone who would come after.
Tim, before I say goodbye to you, a quick announcement, that we've been discussing, that running a weekly show for us has been tremendously rewarding and we really enjoy it. But I do feel that we're now at a stage where we need to spend a bit more time promoting the podcast, and doing a weekly show just doesn't allow that. So we are planning to move the Problem of Money podcast to a fortnightly show. So if it doesn't appear on your player of choice next week, do not be alarmed. We will be back with you the following Wednesday. But please do still continue to support, like, and subscribe and share this podcast with friends and family, and really help us to get the message out, because I think this is a life path endeavor on my part to start this podcast and help it to reach and impact more people. Tim, anything you want to say about?
Actually, yeah, a very quick plug. I'm running one of my money workshops on the 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th of March. It's online. It's over 4 afternoons UK time, so you can attend from anywhere in the world. Details are on my website, which I think is somewhere on the podcast. So yeah, if you're interested in this and you actually want to have time to really get into it and apply it to your own life, come on the workshop. They're great fun.
All right, Tim, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye, Shabba. Take care.